This is the Collecting Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Purse, here with your co-host, Bill Hamill.
I'm somewhat more comfortable collecting real estate than I am collecting other stuff.
Welcome to Collecting Real Estate. This is a podcast where we discuss the collections that real estate investors have built and dive into the stories, habits, and decisions that got them to where they are. My name is Stephen Purse, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Hamill.
Good morning, Stephen. Here it is, early September. Every year at this time, I don't like the sound of school buses coming around. It even though I'm not going to school, it gives me fall is here, and in New York, it's gonna get cold.
Little school day PTSD, but I do like wearing a quarter zip on the golf course. So I'll say you win some, you lose some. Excited to be here with Brian Hemedinger today. Really excited to hear more about his story.
Absolutely.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me, by the way, Stephen and Bill. It's a pleasure to be here today. And yeah, just a little bit about my story. So I'm Brian Hemedinger. I live here in Los Angeles with my wife and my cat, Big Tony. And the origins of my real estate investment in some ways kind of go way back, even though I would say I'm a relatively new real estate investor. I first in my adult life really started to pursue acting. So I spent about 13 years focused on pursuing acting as a profession, lived in New York for about 11 years. And for about 10 of those was really focused on acting and was working some of the time, not working some of the time, but that was really my life. And at about the age of 31, I was newly married to my wife, and I was about $95,000 in debt. And that was a combination of student loans and credit cards. And I was making about $35,000 a year. So I knew that these things just weren't adding up, and I needed to switch up my priorities a little bit. So I started a sales career with an upscale fitness brand in New York. And from there, grew that career over 15 plus years now. And during that time, I got to that point, I was working a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this, where you're caught up in working and you're climbing the ladder. And I got to a certain point where I realized that while I loved what I did, if I just continued to do that and follow the typical strategy of investing in the 401k and putting some money aside in a stock bonds portfolio, that essentially I was stocking money away, hoping that at some point we would be able to retire, live off of that, and not increase the cost of our lifestyle at all in that process. And I realized that just wasn't for me. So it was really about 3 years ago that I started to dig deep into real estate investing, and about 1 year ago that I really started to take significant action by joining a coaching mentorship program with Jake and Gino, which is how I know Bill, actually.
Yeah, that is great. That's what scared me early on, was that plan that society sets for us, saying do this, and at a certain age you might have enough money for retirement, and that did not make me comfortable.
Yeah, I agree. And it to be honest, it wasn't even something I was thinking a lot about, because I was going from making $35,000 a year to making significantly more. So for many years, I was just happy to be living in a place where I was actually able to pay my bills, actually able to save some money. That was my mindset at that time. I wasn't thinking super long term. And it wasn't until I got to a certain point where my eyes just kind of opened up, and I realized there's more that's possible. And I just hadn't seen that before. But unless you really start to surround yourself with people who are talking about alternative strategies, or you start to dig deeper into the education, you don't necessarily really hear about it. And
do you remember,
especially if,
Sorry, Brian, trying to cut you off there. Do you remember what made you open up your eyes to it? Was there one specific event or one person that kind of opened your world to real estate investing?
Yeah, I think I was actually at a Tony Robbins conference. It was I'd gone to a few Tony Robbins events, and one of the ones that I had gone to was this Life and Wealth Mastery, it's called, and it was the wealth portion. And within that, one of the things they had us do was, in advance of the conference, they had us fill out a worksheet. It was basically an online worksheet. We filled in our income, our assets, our investments, everything. It was basically like a personal financial sheet. And then at the actual conference, they had printed out something that calculated based on a certain rate of return, maybe 8%, how long it would take to get to what we would call a financial freedom number, where you could actually live off your investments based on the current lifestyle you live now. And a lot of financial advisors do this type of thing. It was essentially the same thing. But there was something about that moment where I looked at it, and my wife was there too. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, I feel pretty good. We're on track." And I said, "Yeah, I guess we're on track if we want to live the same lifestyle we live now and work for another 20 plus years and then hope that we can retire at that point." And there was just something that clicked with me at that event. And then there was actually a gentleman that got on stage who was talking about real estate investing, and he actually sold a course, which I bought. And that was actually on wholesaling. And I did not do any wholesaling, but I went through that course and I kind of started the process of wholesaling, realized like that's not really for me. But that's really what got me into it. From there, I started to read, I started to listen to the podcast, et cetera, et cetera. And that's where I started to go deeper in.
Yeah, that's glowing. Well, first of all, Tony Robbins, he's the master, and he's able to really highlight things such as that, where you're seeing, okay, is that enough? Once again, you're measuring where you're going to end up being at a certain amount of time. And, you're wise enough to realize, wait a second here, we've got to find a vehicle that is much more certain to provide the income, to provide, any lifestyle that we want. That's the beauty of real estate. Getting into that, knowing that we're both in the Jake and Gino community and we're all trying to find our way. Me being in New York, you being out in LA, where are you positioning yourself in the multifamily world?
Well, the journey I've been on with this is the Jake and Gino program has been outstanding for me, because it took me from a place of reading books, listening to podcasts, getting educated. It took me from that place to actually starting to act as an investor. And what I mean by that is actually research markets, actually visit markets, actually start talking to brokers, connecting with other investors. So it got me out of that sort of just education phase into the doing phase. Through that process, as I started to do all that, I had chosen Reno, Nevada, actually, as my market that I was focused on. And speaking to brokers there, meeting people there, visiting the market. And as I started to become more educated about the multifamily business, I realized, okay, there's different roles within a team. Like, first of all, it doesn't seem that anybody really does this completely on their own. They have a team of people. There's a lot of partnerships. There's a lot of JVs. And I realized, okay, you have an acquisition person, you have an asset management person. Sometimes those are the same. Obviously, you're hiring property management. And I realized, for me, the role that appeals to me the most, and I think plays to my strengths the most, is on the capital side, raising capital, educating investors, and bringing that to the deal, whether that be in a partnership with others that are more, it's like it's a singular firm, or whether that be partnering with multiple operators. And one of the ways that I add value to that partnership is bringing in investors. So that's really what I've been focused on for the past about 4 months now, is focused on building a business that attracts investors, educates investors, so that I can partner with operators and help raise capital for deals that experienced operators that have proven track records in markets that I like, that they're working on, and I can partner with them. And then that's one of the ways that I can add value, is by bringing in investors to that deal.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. We're finding deals, but at the same time, we have to fund those deals. You can have a great deal, but if you can't put together that funding, you can lose that deal very quickly. So raising money is your expertise at this point. What markets are you looking to, bring your investors money?
So the markets I've really been focused on have been higher growth markets. So specifically the Southeast, so North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, also Phoenix, and I do like Reno, Nevada as well. And Texas. Those are the main markets that I've been focused on. Having said that, there's really two things that I've really been focused on. One is meeting and building relationships with experienced operators, people that are in their markets that have had the experience of owning and operating apartment complexes. The second part is attracting investors and building relationships with investors and educating them on what multifamily is, so that at the point that we have an opportunity available, they feel ready to take action. And in that, I've really prioritized the operator in some ways over the market. I need to like the market. The deal needs to make sense. But to me, the operator, the relationship I have with them, the trust and the track record, that's really the most important thing to me, because I recognize that there's a way to make it work in any market. It's just that if you were in Phoenix over the last 3-4 years and you bought an apartment complex, chances are you did pretty well, regardless of how skilled you may have been. Meaning the market has just grown to the degree that it has been set up for success. That may not be true in every single market, but an experienced operator, to me, can make a good deal great, and they can make a deal that maybe ends up to not be so good. They can make it turn out okay. And that's really what I prioritize, is the operator.
Completely agree with that. I love looking at the whole story arc here of you starting its acting career and learning skills that I'm sure really helped and applied to that sales career. And then you just carried on that momentum into real estate. And when you were 18, starting an acting career, you probably didn't think you were going to be investing in real estate, right?
I did not.
But
that was the farthest thing from my mind.
It's so cool that it works out.
Yeah, it is funny. And that's something I've thought a lot about over the past year or so, because sometimes I'll get self-conscious about the fact that I came to this. So what I feel like is later in life. And it's funny because I was talking to somebody last night who's 29, and he was saying that he felt like he's really late to the game. I said, well, if you're late to the game, I don't know where I am. And, even within Jake and Gino and other investors, I know people in their early to mid 20s that are deep into this. And I'm like, wow, amazing that you're thinking that way at that age. It just wasn't part of my consciousness. As Bill said, I was focused on being an actor. I was focused on this single path. And now over the past year or so, I've really been reflecting on how are all the things that I've done in my life, how are those all contributing to what is happening right now and the skills that I have to bring to multifamily, to a team, to building a business. And there's quite a bit of it between the acting, moving into the sales, moving into leadership, moving into operations, and all of that ties together into being effective at this business as well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, that acting experience early on, had to have been, a great experience to allow you to be the speaker that you are. As we met, Brian is he's a fantastic public speaker. And I'm sure that a lot of that was tuned just from your early acting career.
I'm sure it was, although, and I mentioned this to you before, Bill, I was terrified of public speaking. Acting was one thing. And I think the reason why I got into acting was because as a kid, I was very shy. And for whatever reason, I started getting into plays when I was young in elementary school. And when I would get on stage and I would be in the plays, I just didn't feel shy anymore because I was just doing the thing. And it felt freeing to do that. And I think that's why I loved acting so much, because it kind of broke me out of this shell of the identity of being this shy kid into just being whoever that character was. Carried over, though, was I was really terrified of public speaking. It was very different if I wasn't acting. If I was getting up in front of a group and speaking, that terrified me. I would have like major anxiety, panic attacks. I would avoid it as much as I possibly could. So it was something I really needed to actively work on. But I agree, the skills that I've developed as an actor, I'm sure, have helped me as a speaker. It was more about getting over that fear, which I'm not totally over, but being able to start to manage that and in some ways use that energy to my advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. So raising money, knowing, well, it's not common knowledge, but I've been raising money myself, and that public speaking and that gift of being able to communicate is so important, where any of us could have a deal. But if we're raising money and we communicate, differently with the same deal, you can have investors who are investing in this guy with the same track record on this deal. But if this person didn't communicate that so well, they're not interested in that deal, even though it was a great opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. There's an element that we just naturally are drawn to certainty. And when something is delivered, when a message is delivered with absolute certainty, with confidence, and you just naturally have confidence in that individual because of their delivery, that is going to definitely affect the way that you look at the opportunity. And different people, because as you know, investors are on the spectrum of, some will go very, very deep into a deal. They'll want to look at all the underwriting and they really, really want to understand it. And then there's other investors that will look at it more at a high level and look at the basics and the market and the team, and they'll say, okay, this looks pretty good to me, I'm in. And particularly for those that maybe aren't necessarily going to go as deep, when everything is presented really well, and when the person communicating is communicating with that confidence and that certainty, that is something that is definitely going to influence that person's decision for sure.
No doubt. State, showing up in that certain state. Once again, I did several Tony Robbins events myself, and boy, those are highlights in every event he does, is that certainty, confidence, and getting into state when you need to be able to deliver.
Absolutely.
So, Brian, when you joined Jake and Gino, you learned about the different roles that go into a syndication or a larger investment model. You figured out which was best suited for you. You're focusing on that. Have you been able to establish a team within the community that's looking for deals currently?
I don't have anybody that I'm really actively working with as part of a team. I mean, I have relationships with individuals, and one of the things within Jake and Gino that we do is something called an accountability pod. And that's, you meet with a group every other week. And that group has become, because we've been meeting consistently for the last almost year now, that group we've gotten to know really, really well. And it's great to kind of follow what everybody's doing and learn from each other. And other relationships that have been built just through going to the events, or being part of Toastmasters, or just setting up calls. So there's definitely people that I have relationships with that we could potentially work together, but no one that I'm formally partnered with.
Okay, so you're still new into this whole adventure. Have you?
Yeah.
How's it been dealing with this and still working that full-time job with the sales, high-level fitness industry?
It's had its challenges, but it's been excellent. And another thing that I do is I'm also a coach, meaning I'm certified as a life coach, and I coach for life coaching and business coaching. And I originally did that really to be more effective at my role where I work full time. However, in doing it, I realized how much I loved it. So I actually also coach clients, and I work with another coach too, to facilitate some of his weekly calls. And big picture wise, one of the reasons why I decided to go into multifamily and build this business is because I wanted that experience of building a business outside of my full-time job, not just for the income, but for the experience of doing it. Because a lot of the people that I coach are business owners, are entrepreneurs. And I wanted to have that experience so that I could be a more effective coach for them. And I also wanted to have that experience because some of the people I coach are also in similar situations where maybe they're in a full-time job. Maybe they love it, maybe they don't. And they're looking to build something outside of that. So all of it and all the internal things that we go through in building a business and all the mindset and all the time management and figuring that out, to me, that has had its challenges, but it's all been welcome because it's all part of the process and it's all what I wanted. I wanted to experience this challenge. I wanted to take something on that was new for me, both for my personal growth and so that I could be a better coach for the people that I work with.
No, that's great. Going back to that accountability pod, which I'm part of one as well. As a coach going into an accountability pod, do you find yourself falling into coaching mode when you have 5 or 6 people in a pod and you're all kind of like-minded doing the same thing? You know, we're all trying to not only, help ourselves in this space, but that's the whole idea of the pod, is to make each other accountable. Do you see yourself turning into that coach in these accountability pods?
Yeah, I do, but I feel that we all do, actually. Meaning, I felt at the beginning, I played that role a little bit more so than maybe some others. But throughout time, I feel that we've all played that role because as you get to know each other and you hear each other speak about what we're doing and maybe some of the things that are holding us back from taking that next step, you start to tune in to the language, you start to tune in to the story that someone is telling themselves. And because you have that relationship, you start to challenge that. We all, I feel, naturally do that as the relationship develops. So if I say something to the effect of, well, the next thing that I really need to do is I really need to find a single operator that I'm committed to, that I'm going to partner with, but I'm not sure that I want to do that because of X, X, and X. Well, because of the relationship, someone would say, well, tell me a little bit more about that. You just said this, but how true is that really? So I feel that we all play that role as a coach because as we get to know each other, we start to tune in to the things that maybe hold us back individually, maybe our individual fears or stories that we're telling ourselves that hold us back from taking that action that scares us a little bit.
Yeah, that's the hard part, though. We tend to have our accountability pod and we just compare notes. We describe what we've been doing for the past month when the real heavy lifting is actually making each other accountable, which as long as you have that rapport, that relationship, do you see that in your accountability pod where you use that great example, where you're waffling a little bit on, hey, I want to do this, but, do you have people in that pod that are able to challenge you and hold you accountable?
I would say challenge for sure. And sometimes, Bill, we do compare notes. Sometimes it is that. Sometimes it's more about, oh, here's what I'm focused on. Sometimes it's focused more on one person because maybe one person is more actively engaged in a specific deal at that point. Maybe they've just made an offer or they're making an offer, or there was one gentleman in our accountability pod who had just gone through his first raise as more of a capital raising partner. And so we talk a lot about that. We just had that last night. But I would say that within the call itself, I do see us challenging each other. I wouldn't say that there's the accountability to me comes from the consistency of then having to come back 2 weeks later and talk about the progress that you've made. And I think there's a tremendous power in accountability. So it's not like we're texting each other throughout the week saying, hey, did you do this? Did you do that? It's not that kind of accountability. It's more of that. I've told the guys, this is what I'm focused on. This is what I'm doing next. And when I show up 2 weeks from now, if I haven't done that, they're going to ask me, oh, how's it going with this? And I'm going to have to say, oh, I haven't quite gotten there. And that just doesn't feel good. So I think that's such a powerful thing in all parts of life. that's not the only group that I'm in that establishes accountability. I have a mastermind group that I'm in. I've got a specific capital raising mastermind group that I'm in. So I've got these multiple groups that all give me some form of accountability to help me stay on track with the multiple goals that I have in life.
Yeah, does it seem like each accountability, every group you're in where you have these discussions and they're not necessarily pinning you down, but based on the discussion, you're able to leave there saying to yourself, wow, now just from having that discussion, it highlighted what I should have been doing over the past 2 weeks or what I need to do, where just that meeting with a few people really made that, glowing to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Sometimes just talking something out, talking about what you're doing, what your next step is, what's maybe holding you back. Sometimes that's all you need, because maybe you've thought about it, but you haven't articulated it. And as you're talking it out, you realize the story you might be telling yourself that isn't really accurate. And you start to realize, okay, I know what I need to do now.
So what is that next step for you, Brian? What is Bill going to be holding you accountable to in that next meeting?
So really the next step for me is I'm at a place where I've built a good amount of the infrastructure required for this capital raising side of the business. And I'm really at a place where one of the things I've realized is that I'm very effective at moving forward with things like I move forward with Jake and Gino. I move forward with joining the capital raising mastermind group that I'm in. I move forward with the networking calls, and I'll get on, multiple calls a week, whether that be webinars, et cetera, for more education. I'm very effective at that. But when it comes to taking more of a leap, when it comes to something that feels like there's higher stakes, that's where I hesitate a little bit. And I feel that the next step for me is to actually partner with an operator and raise capital for a deal. Now, what I imagine for myself is this is the kind of the thought that I have. What if Bill had a partnership opportunity for me today? And he said, here's the deal. We went through it, really like it. And we figure out, okay, what role will I play in this? And one of those roles will be to raise a certain amount of capital. And I just commit to him. And I say, okay, I'm going to do it. And we're going to do it by this time. What happens then? Like, what kind of action does that plunge me into? And that in some ways is really appealing to me. And it's also really scary to me, because the thing that I fear is I wouldn't want to make a commitment that I wasn't able to follow through on. But then the catch-22 on that is, yeah, but are you ever really going to do anything if you're waiting for 100% certainty?
Wow,
so I think that
takes you into that growth mindset there, where we're sitting in that little circle where you're so comfortable doing what you do. But what if what you're really striving for is put in front of you? At that point, I heard that word fear, which I'm like, oh no, fear. Where I tried to train my mind where it's like, oh no, this is just getting into that growth area, the beauty of uncertainty and the beauty of the unknown, because that's really going to be satisfying when you put that pressure on yourself. Say, I'm going to raise $1 million for your deal. And at that point, you take it serious enough, and you just grasp the challenge in front of you and get it done.
Exactly. So to answer your question, Stephen, I think that's really my next step, is making a commitment to something and then just going and taking that leap.
That's the hardest part in this industry.
But the most satisfying, that's right. Where, we're all, so many people are so reluctant of getting into that outside of the box, that uncomfortable area, but that's where we grow. And when you get the result that you want, oh my goodness, it's just the most satisfying thing. specifically in relation to, the comfort zone, the boring comfort zone, which is routine, never changes. And ultimately, it's never going to match the result when you get into that uncomfortable area and you get that growth.
I agree. And that's where the confidence and the certainty is built. When you take on something where in your mind, you're like, I know I can do this, but meaning I know it's possible, but it also really frightens me. And then you move forward and you actually do it and you realize, wow, okay, I'm capable of more than I even gave myself credit for. And that builds your certainty and your confidence even more. Absolutely.
That is where the muscle is built. And that's where we are in this space. We have that proximity with Jake and Gino, which is fantastic. And, we're in that world and we're watching each other have, degrees of success and some others not having degrees of success. But, this isn't an easy space. And that's why we do need teams and we do need that proximity to help each other to get us there, because it's not easy to find a $10 million deal that is worth investing, that you're able to raise money. When you're buying a $10 million deal, that comes along with raising, $3 or $4 million. So we have no choice but to be in that growth area, and we have to live there.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's stepping into that uncertainty is where the growth happens. And again, surrounding yourself with people that can support you in that process. I mean, one of the things that has helped me with some of the risks that I have taken is weighing it out and starting with the downside, actually starting with, okay, what's the downside to this? Meaning, what's the worst case scenario? Because so oftentimes the fear feels greater than what the consequence could actually be. Meaning when you really lay it out, okay, what if I make this commitment to Bill and I'm not able to follow through on exactly what I committed to? All right, what would actually happen in that scenario? Okay, well, maybe we could figure out if I was a little bit short, maybe we could figure it out how to get it from somewhere else. And you start to lay it out and you start to kind of plan out the scenario and you realize, okay, even if this didn't happen, the consequence isn't so severe. It's not life altering. And then you go to, okay, now what's the upside? What happens when I do deliver on this? What is that going to achieve for me, for my business, for my investors, for the way that I feel? And then you start to get actually excited about it. So once you've kind of been realistic about what the actual risk is and what that worst case scenario is, and then you've now built yourself up with what is achievable, that to me is an effective formula for getting yourself to move forward.
I agree. It's usually that asymmetric risk is so important to be able to look at it like that. Bill, do you want to wrap this one up?
Yeah, I'd love to, Stephen. Thank you very much. Brian, they say you need 3 of something to be considered a collection. So we have a collection of questions for you. What is one real estate goal you have for the next year?
So one real estate goal is to be part of my first deal by the end of this year, which is only a few months away. And again, that would be on the capital raising side. That would be, to me, part of my responsibility is pulling in investors for a total of $1 million raise by the end of this year.
Awesome. Number 2, what personal goal do you have for the next year?
Wow. I have a few. So I think the one that comes to mind to me is I recently, again, I'm part of some other groups, and one of the challenges that was proposed to us within another group that I'm in is to take on a physical challenge, something that will challenge you mentally, physically, and emotionally, so that you can put yourself through that experience. And I know, Bill, you're a runner. You put yourself through that experience. So again, you can kind of overcome the mental side, meaning push yourself beyond what your mind is telling you that you can do. So there's 2 things I've taken on with that. So I've taken on jujitsu,
Nice.
which has been an interesting experience, and did my first class, which was very uncomfortable, but I'm going back.
Cool.
Basically got choked for an hour. And I've also committed to a Spartan race, a super Spartan, as more of an invent type physical challenge. So that's a personal goal for me, is to take on these physical challenges that are going to challenge me mentally, emotionally, and spiritually to push myself a little farther.
It's so
That's
good.
beautiful. Third question. What can Stephen, I, or the listeners help you with, and how can we contact you?
Well, you can, first I'll start with contact. So you can contact me a few different ways. You can email me at Brian, Brian, at maebarcapital.com. Maebar is Maebar capital.com. My website should be, it's not ready yet, but it should be within the next couple of weeks. And that's maebarcapital.com. LinkedIn is great for me too, just Brian Hemedinger on LinkedIn. Instagram is fine, which is at @bhemedinger. And in terms of help, I would, a couple things. One is, if you are an operator in a market and you want to talk about what you're doing, I would just love to talk to different operators, different investors, just to build the relationships and see if there's a potential to work together in the future. If you are somebody that's interested in real estate and just want to understand more, then reach out to me, because I love to educate investors, love to help people understand more about the multifamily business, especially if you relate to my story, meaning maybe you're someone that has a full-time job that wants to get into real estate, but just doesn't really know how, because I would love to talk to you about the process that I've gone through and all the different ways that you can invest in real estate with different levels of commitment.
That's awesome, Brian. Thank you. And we're going to continue this conversation. I mentioned it before, but I've been an operator for so many years. The big challenge is we're in New York, and it's so common that New York isn't a highlight of people's markets, but I will persuade you to raise money for one of our future deals. So thanks again, Brian. And if anyone liked this episode, please subscribe, give us a 5-star review. And thanks again, Brian, for a great episode.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Stephen. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Brian.
All ours.